Imagine if every casual hello felt like solving a complex calculus equation in real time, while the person next to you has absolutely no idea it is happening at all inside your head. For high IQ individuals around the world, that mental workout is real, measurable on brain imaging, and it is silently burning through their cognitive battery every single day of their adult lives without any visible external sign. Functional neuroimaging research has demonstrated that more analytical brains fire across a broader default mode network, the brain's resting state hub of spontaneous cognition, meaning even at rest they are doing measurable extra processing work compared with typical brains of the same age in any cross-sectional study. That extra work shows up most painfully in group dinners, small talk stands at parties, and crowded rooms where the mind still racks up layers of analysis without permission from the owner to switch off for even a few minutes of rest. Brain scientist John Sweller's decades of research on cognitive load, developed extensively since the late 1980s in educational and cognitive psychology, explains exactly why this hidden work exhausts social stamina far more than most people ever realize is happening inside friends and family members they see every day. Here are the 5 forces draining a high IQ battery in plain, everyday social settings, plus the science-backed moves to bring that energy back without changing who you are at all in your closest relationships. The first drain comes from perpetual pattern recognition, and it never turns off no matter how hard the person tries to relax and just be normal for a single evening. Highly analytical minds automatically catalog micro-expressions, the tiny facial flashes that last just 1/25th of a second, according to psychologist Paul Ekman's foundational cross-cultural work in the 1970s. They also automatically register vocal tone shifts, body language changes, and the gap between what someone says and what they actually mean underneath it all in ordinary conversation. That cataloging work is not chosen by the listener. It is the brain's default mode of operation in any social context, and modern functional MRI scans confirm it runs during every chat whether the person wants it to or not, eating through finite cognitive resources with every passing minute of small talk. Where a typical conversation reveals just one layer to most listeners at the table, the analytical mind simultaneously processes the literal words, any hidden subtext, the speaker's emotional state at that moment, the group's social dynamics, and every logical inconsistency hiding in the flow of the conversation. This mismatch between effort and reward carries a formal name in the research literature: information poverty, where the brain burns extraordinary metabolic calories, but receives almost nothing intellectually meaningful back from low-density social talk like small talk about weekend plans or office gossip. Prolonged high cognitive load steadily degrades the quality of executive decisions, impulse control, and even everyday emotional reactions, a phenomenon various researchers now call decision fatigue. But that extends well beyond just decisions into all effortful mental tasks across the entire working day. Over time, sustained mental effort spikes cortisol, the body's main stress hormone, which gradually shrinks the hippocampus, weakens memory consolidation in measurable ways, disrupts deep sleep quality, and lowers overall immune function across months and years of repeated exposure. Studies on gifted adults led by researchers like Linda Silverman at the Gifted Development Center consistently report higher rates of social fatigue, stronger cravings for solo recovery time, and much sharper depletion after big gatherings. Those same studies also consistently document a stronger tendency to find large groups draining rather than energizing compared with the average person at the same event. The exhaustion is not a vague psychological discomfort that can be shrugged off with a night's sleep. It is a measurable physiological state, where the very wiring that makes the mind exceptional is the same wiring that makes everyday life feel like a marathon without a finish line in sight. The second drain comes from sensory and social overload, where a busy room feels like a crowded computer screen, running too many open tabs at once without enough memory to handle them all simultaneously. Heightened perceptual sensitivity, the same trait psychologist Elaine Aron labels high sensitivity, and which Aron found correlates significantly with higher IQ in large sample studies, makes open social spaces feel like a flood of input hitting the brain at once from every direction at the same time. In a crowded room, the analytical listener is not just hearing the friend standing in front of them. They are also simultaneously tracking the room-wide emotional temperature, distant conversations they cannot fully hear across the noise, lighting changes, room echo, and the spatial distance between every body in the visible space. The critical difference here is between deliberate deep thinking, the kind that produces real insight and feels rewarding when it lands in a productive session, and automatic environmental processing, which simply consumes mental bandwidth without giving anything back to the thinker at all in return. Deliberate thinking is chosen and produces genuine pleasure when it pays off with a clean breakthrough, while automatic processing just happens involuntarily and steals capacity from tasks that genuinely matter to the person running it behind their eyes without warning. Aron's research on the deeply processing trait she labeled HSP shows that highly sensitive nervous systems activate more strongly to everyday stimuli like background music, perfume traces, and fluorescent lighting in ordinary offices. As a direct consequence, overwhelm sets in faster and recovery time stretches much longer than for less wired individuals sitting in the very same room around them at work. The trajectory of overload follows a clear and predictable path from sharp early social performance, through formulaic responses, fading patience, scan-for-exit behaviors, and finally a hard mental shutdown that feels exactly like a desktop computer running completely out of available RAM mid-task. Some high IQ individuals even report physical symptoms including a pounding headache, rising nausea, and full-body fatigue, once their cognitive reserves run dry during a long social stretch, with no clean escape available nearby in the room. The reason this feels so unfair to those who live it daily is that the wiring produces genuine brilliance in quiet, focused environments like a library or a solo writing session. But the very same wiring produces total collapse in loud, crowded, unpredictable ones, where escape is not always easily available without social cost. The third drain comes from the logic gap, the painful mismatch between how fast the analytical mind works and how slowly a group conversation tends to actually move through any given topic from open to close. High IQ individuals often form multi-step conclusions several beats ahead of the conversational flow in any group, which creates constant cognitive suspension, while waiting for the group to reach an answer the fast mind essentially saw long before the discussion even began in earnest around the table. That waiting is itself an invisible but real burden, suppressing the urge to interrupt, swallowing the impatience, and re-engaging with content the mind has already finished processing for the third time in a row without anyone else in the group even noticing the gap. The most exhausting part of conversation for expert thinkers is not the thinking itself. It is the real-time translation of complex, multi-layered ideas into language the listener can actually follow without losing the substantive point entirely along the way during delivery. Sociolinguists call this translation task code switching, and it demands sustained simultaneous monitoring of vocabulary level, abstraction level, shared cultural assumptions, the listener's apparent comprehension, and whether the message just landed as intended by the speaker at the other end. Every time a person shifts between formal work talk, casual family talk, and intimate friend talk in a single day, the brain pays what researchers call context switching overhead, often estimated at 20 to 25 minutes of focused re-immersion to fully settle into a new cognitive mode after each switch. When this gap between rich internal life and limited outward speech stays wide for years and decades, Researchers call it asynchronous development stress, and it quietly fuels social withdrawal plus anxiety, specifically tied to other people, rather than to situations or tasks at work or home. Asynchronous development stress is also why many highly intelligent adults find romantic relationships surprisingly exhausting to maintain. Since intimate relationships demand the deepest kind of code switching of all and the highest level of cognitive surveillance of every facial cue from a partner. Over a working career, this cumulative dynamic quietly erodes willingness to start new friendships outside work, because the experienced mind knows in advance how cognitively costly each new relationship will be to navigate and maintain over many years ahead in life. The fourth drain is the anatomy of neurofatigue itself, which leaves a clear and traceable paper trail in specific measurable brain regions across the day after sustained cognitive demand of any kind. Neuroscience defines cognitive fatigue as a measurable decline in working memory capacity, attention, inhibitory control, and flexible executive function after sustained mental effort, distinct from simple sleepiness or basic loss of motivation from boredom or external distraction in a meeting. The two brain regions that show reduced activation after long cognitive demand on fMRI are the prefrontal cortex, which handles planning, judgment, and self-control, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which manages effort regulation and conflict monitoring in real time during hard tasks. Roy Baumeister's ego depletion research from the late 1990s showed that self-regulation, decision-making, and focused attention all draw on a shared internal resource pool that runs down with heavy use, even when the tasks at hand have nothing obvious to do with each other across the day. The most recognizable warning signs include trouble concentrating on a single task, slowed thinking speed, brain fog, lost motivation for things normally enjoyed, sharper irritability at small everyday frustrations, social withdrawal from invitations, persistent dull headaches, gut distress linked to the gut-brain vagus nerve, and difficulty falling asleep because the brain cannot stop ruminating on unfinished mental loops in the dark. Mentalizing, the act of reading another person's mind and intentions during conversation, lights up its own dedicated brain network, including the temporoparietal junction, the medial prefrontal cortex, and the posterior superior temporal sulcus. And that entire dedicated network fatigues into a very specific craving for absolute silence after heavy extended use. The social brain network that handles mentalizing is metabolically expensive on its own, and for highly analytical individuals, it runs at significantly higher intensity during every social encounter than it does in less perceptive peers in cross-sectional comparisons. Long-term high cortisol from chronic cognitive overload shrinks the hippocampus over months and years in measurable ways on brain scans, weakens synaptic plasticity across neural circuits critical for new learning, and slowly degrades the very learning capacity that made the brain exceptional in the first place during youth. That is the cruelest finding in this whole field of research today. The very neural system that makes high IQ individuals brilliant is the same system most exposed to chronic stress damage from the very workload itself generates, while running day after day without scheduled recovery. Recovery, therefore, does not just mean simple passive rest in front of a glowing screen. It means genuine sustained cognitive solitude, because only the genuine absence of incoming mental input lets the depleted prefrontal networks begin restoring baseline function at all over the hours that follow. The fifth piece is the most hopeful of all, because cognitive capacity is a managed biological resource, not a fixed mental trait to be prayed through each demanding day by sheer willpower alone in modern life. The first move is cognitive triage, deliberately deciding which conversations deserve full engagement today and which can safely run on social autopilot to preserve finite mental reserves for the moments that actually matter most to the person's larger long-term goals outside the social calendar. The second move is intentional recovery. And Rachel and Stephen Kaplan's attention restoration theory, published in the 1990s in Empirical Studies, proves that time in nature, quiet walks in green space, and non-goal soft fascination activities like watching birds at a feeder measurably rebuild directed attention capacity within minutes of starting. The third move is mindfulness practice, which has built a substantial peer-reviewed evidence base over decades for reducing the default mode rumination and involuntary processing that high IQ minds find so hard to switch off in the first place during a demanding workday or family gathering. Mindfulness does not lower the person's actual thinking power at all. It simply teaches them to watch the processing stream instead of being carried away by it, which dramatically lowers its autonomic metabolic cost over time across weeks of consistent daily practice. The fourth move is healthy boundaries, including fewer standing group gatherings on the calendar, more one-on-one time where possible with trusted individuals, and honest conversations about availability rather than defaulting to overcommitment for the sake of politeness, alone at ongoing social cost. This boundary-setting approach has real clinical backing from research on sustainable high performance across many demanding professional fields, and it is not antisocial at all. It is well-documented cognitive self-preservation in disguise for highly sensitive analytical thinkers in modern workplaces. The fifth move is non-negotiable sleep. Since the brain's glymphatic system, formally described by Macon Nettergaard and her collaborators only in 2013, actively flushes metabolic waste products from neural cells during deep slow-wave rest every single night of healthy sleep. Quality sleep also restores prefrontal executive function, actively consolidates new factual and procedural memory, and processes unprocessed emotional residue from the day's events. But ruminating high IQ minds statistically struggle more with sleep onset than average thinkers, making sleep hygiene especially important for this group in particular. The sixth move is reframing intelligence itself, recognizing that a perpetually processing analytical brain is not broken at all. It is simply expensive to operate without scheduled maintenance windows quietly built into every week of working and family life. The goal is not to process less sensory input forever. It is to process input more intentionally, and to build the sustainable recovery rhythms that let the cognitive engine perform at its peak precisely when it truly matters most for the person's deepest long-term goals across a working life. Now that you understand exactly why your brain burns out socially even on ordinary days, there is one hidden accelerator most high IQ people quietly overlook, and it is hiding in plain sight on their nightstand right now tonight. In tomorrow's video, we will show how a single small nightly habit can roughly double cognitive recovery speed and slash social fatigue by the next morning, without changing your personality or your actual job at all in any visible way to anyone else around you. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you absolutely do not miss the one tiny habit that turns neurofatigue from a daily struggle into a non-issue for sharp, pattern-seeking minds like yours for the long term ahead of you.